Definitely. Well, okay, I think I got it set up. I'm just gonna go out without chat this time. I think everything looks good. Excited to start. When I talk to people, I don't really want it to be an interview, right? Just like a conversation. And as I was going through today through like the things that I wanted to ask you, the one thing that popped up was like, how did you get to Fabric? Like, why choose the name Fabric?
Yeah, it's a good question. Naming is hard, you know. We
Right.
we had a we struggled with like a bunch of different names, and the thing about Fabric. So we're focused on communities, crowdfunding, DAOs, right? Like we're fascinated by the intersection of ideas, capital, and people, and so like one of the kind of core principles there is we believe that we want to help facilitate people creating something that's like bigger and better than what they could do alone. And so in that way, it's like a project or a community. It's like you imagine the individuals as kind of like threads, and each thread in
Mm,
isolation is very weak and can be broken, but like when woven together is very, very strong. And there's malleability there, there's flexibility, like they're kind of they can, like a piece, like a textile, a fabric, it can be made to be very small or very big. And so it just seemed, and it's also like it's like it's not some like weird word that like you haven't heard of before, like it's like a word that's very common. It's an old word.
mm.
And so, yeah, Chris mentioned something called the bar test, which is more for like domains, which is that you have to be able to, if somebody asks the name of your company or the URL, you have to be able to like say it in a crowded bar very loudly and then have them understand the first time.
Interesting.
And so, like, if you shout fabric, like most people will hear that. So we're like, okay, we like that. And then surprisingly, like Fabric Incorporated was a name that no one had, and so we got it. Um, yeah. Anyway, that was the name. That was like kind of the thinking behind the name.
That's cool. Yeah, Fabric for sure is like kind of interlocking kind of people, and ultimately, obviously you can create this thing that is, I think, very, very much so greater when you put things together. Um,
Hmm.
Yesterday when we were talking, you talked about like your history, right? Your work history and kind of your continuous movement towards getting into startups. I would love to hear more about that, and I'm sure the chat would as well.
Yeah. So do you mean? I guess like one thing that's been really important to me in my career was just like learning. Getting
Right.
better. I felt like you should know why you work somewhere and what you're trying to get out of it. And so I've always used the like feeling of being bored or frustrated as like a strong cue that it's like time to go. And
Mm,
so sometimes I've stayed at places for a really long time. I worked at Google for 6 years. That's a long time. To me, it felt like a long time. I moved around a lot on different teams when I was there. Uh, but yeah, I would think that like there's certainly been moments where I felt stuck because I wasn't learning, I wasn't growing. Didn't feel like I was getting better in like really in any way. And so I've just tried to really pay attention to that and use that as a kind of a guide for deciding when it's time to do something new. And
mm,
so I think that's meant that like I've just moved around. I've tried different things. Like I've worked, like I was an artist assistant, I was an intern at a magazine, like, I was a junior designer at like a branding and advertising firm. Like I've just tried a lot of different things to kind of find, what I'm doing now. I feel like it's all kind of like culminated in what I'm doing now. Yeah, does that kind of speak to what you're?
yeah, definitely. I think it ultimately is like I feel like you've always wanted to start your own thing, right? And you've been on the sidelines. and now you're starting this own thing. And this is a question that I also wanted to ask. Greg asks, but what is your favorite DAO? And um, maybe also just like touch more about like what you're doing with Fabric, because I really do think it's interesting and kind of lays the the foundation for creating DAOs.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a good question. I mean, I am a big fan of CityDAO. I think what CityDAO is doing is like audacious and big, and I think it's just a cool idea. I don't know, like I've paid close attention to what's happening there. Um, I think that DAOs are still like very early in their kind of like life cycle. Like, one thought experiment that I like to do is like if you snap your fingers and you remove all the humans from the equation, like what happens next?
Hmm.
Does do operations like cease to exist, or are like contract calls still are function calls still being made into the smart contract, and is it still basically functioning and operational? And so you could answer that question and say, well, if everything stopped, then it's not actually a DAO. It's like something else. And that if there was no change whatsoever, then you know that you're part of a DAO. But if you use like that really strict definition, then it would basically disqualify a bunch of like interesting phenomenons that we've observed over the past few years, like things like FWB or Vector DAO or like Raid Guild, or there's all kinds of like emergent communities that are doing interesting things, and sometimes the relationships between participants is mediated with a smart contract, or a token of some kind, or it isn't. But I feel like that's a detail that like matters less than the actual like phenomenon. So to me, when I look at like FWB, like they did the FWB fest, or like Bankless, like it's fascinating, like I feel like this all represents like the kind of like frontier. And so what we're trying to do with Fabric is basically pay close attention to the like emergent behavior, and then build tools that like democratize a lot of those things, like use those as signals for what the market wants, and then basically like decrease the barrier to entry. Because the reality is like Cabin DAO is another really interesting DAO, but it's like Cabin DAO is comprised of a lot of like really really smart, very technical people that are building their own tools. Orange DAO is another good example of this. Like
Hmm.
a lot of DAOs today are comprised of like smart, sort of tech savvy people. But
Right.
if you take the view that like DAOs are going to grow, you know, like by many orders of magnitude, then what that implies is that the is that the barrier to entry to making them is going to get much much lower. So one analogy that we've made is like, it's like, imagine building a website, or an e-commerce shop in like 1998. Like you definitely had to be a programmer, right? You needed a lot of specific knowledge, but doing that today is trivial. And so that's kind of like our kind of mission, is to democratize the tools, to make it really easy, and in the belief that if we do that, more people will make these sorts of organizations. So that's kind of how we're thinking about it now. And this is all still very much in flux. It's
Hmm.
like everyone says we're early. We are early, so um, we're trying to be adaptive, and keep an open mind, and not get too fixed in our perspective.
Hmm. What do you think motivates you so much to work in an industry kind of empowering DAOs? I think DAOs are a very powerful thing. So what do they mean to
Yeah.
you?
I mean, I'm just a punk ass. Like I just, like I dropped out of high school. Like I grew up listening to punk and hardcore and skating, and just like I've always hated authority. I've hated being told what to do. And I just look at like existing power structures and the way the world is organized, and I'm just like, man, fuck this. Like
Hmm.
this feels so broken. Like there should be tools that emancipate people from the current system. You know, there should be alternatives. I'm definitely not someone who wants to tear things down. I'm a big fan of Balaji, and I like what he says about this, where he's just like, build something else in parallel. You know, like build a better alternative. You think that you can do it better, then do it. Like try to do it better. And so that's what we're trying to do. You know, but that's like honestly when we're, you know, working for a bunch of different startups at various stages and big companies and stuff, like I always knew that I wanted to start a company. But I mean, we talked about this yesterday. Like, I also realized that you can't just start a company for the sake of starting a company. Like, you have to believe in what you're doing.
Right.
And I always kind of envied the people who had that conviction. And I was always like, man, I want that. You know, like that's the edge. That's like the competitive edge is when you yourself are like a true believer. And so I struggled for a long time, like years, to try to. I was asking that question, like, what do I believe in? Like, what can I commit? You know, a decade of my life to building, or more even. What am I gonna like stick to, even when everyone's like laughing at me, or like the
Mm.
hard time, where there's like no growth or whatever? Like, what am I just gonna be like, you know, still psyched on? And it was around this idea of like building better tools for organizing people,
Mm.
ideas, and money. And
Right.
I think that DAOs are kind of um, the ideal means by which to do that. And so that was the thing that when I sort of landed on that thesis, I was like, okay, I'm in.
Mm. I want to touch on something that chat was talking about, which is like having the word DAO. Is having the word DAO kind of like good for the DAO, I guess, industry? Because, you know, maybe it
Yeah,
can say some things. Like, what do you think about that?
I fucking hate that word.
Right.
I like hate the term. I was telling Brian about this earlier. Like we blew it in terms of like our messaging, like talking about that, and we're in the process of like removing all use of the term DAO. Just because I think it's like it's a jargony concept that even like fucking crypto people get stuck on and have a hard time
Mm.
defining. And so it just like it doesn't serve us. It doesn't serve our users. It just confuses people. And so like I keep going to, you know, communities are really powerful, and sometimes communities have a contract and sometimes they don't. You know, sometimes they'll start as like a really small group and then they'll end up having a contract, or maybe you have a something that starts off as like very transactional, it's like a protocol contract, and then a community forms around it. So like, you know, whether that means like it's like, does it, if you have a community but no contract, do you have a DAO? Some would say that you don't,
Mm.
but then at some point, like it's going to cross some threshold that maybe it does use a contract in some novel way. Is like, does that mean that it then became a DAO? And so then you can get into this sort of, I don't know, it like reminds me when I was like a dumb teenager and I'd be like, well, that band's more like post punk, whereas this other band is more like a proto punk band. You know, like you just get into these dumb like exercises of just like labeling, you know, like it's just stupid labeling. So it's just like it's like, oh well, that's not a DAO. It's a do, or it's a DAC, or it's a. And I'm just like, whatever. I don't
Mm.
care. None of this shit matters. Like I just want to empower groups of people to fulfill their fucking dreams. You know what I mean? And if
Mm.
they need to use something that, if they need to incentivize their members in a novel way, then we should provide the tools for them to do that. And so like whatever we're struggling with, what do you call this? Is this a
Mm.
community? Is it a project? Like every product, almost every product you can think of, it has like a canonical unit around which the product is oriented. So like a repo on GitHub, a campaign on on Kickstarter,
Right.
uh, a tweet on Twitter, an email on Gmail, like, and so on and so forth, right? A room in Zoom. And
Mm.
so we're struggling with like, what is the canonical unit in Fabric? Like, what is it, a project? Is it a community? Like, what we know it can't be is a DAO. And so we're still sort of like figuring this out.
Right. Stepping back real quick from what you're building, and I think it's super powerful and it's something that's super needed, especially in like a kind of decentralized world. You mentioned that you were really into like punk and hard rock. Like, can you talk about that a little bit more? I think chat would like love to hear about that.
So I got into like, I don't even know how. I must have had a friend or something that was like into, I don't know. I can't honestly can't remember the first show that I went to, but I somehow went to like a it's kind of like a hardcore like metal show when I was like 15 or 16.
Mm,
And I was like, "Oh my God, this is for me. Like these are my people. This is like it just made sense to me." And I just got really really into that. Like played in bands, I made a little record label, I made zines. Like I just sort of fell in love with this world of like DIY, and the kind of like I don't know punk ethos. It just sort of fell into that, and then a friend of mine was in a band that went on tour with like kind of this like legendary New York hardcore band called Agnostic Front, and they were like, "Do you want to come on tour as our roadie?" And I was like, "Fuck yeah!" So I dropped out of high school my freshman year, and I went on tour. So we had 28 days,
holy shit.
and I was just like this fucking dumb kid, but like I might have a picture somewhere.
Yes, show a photo if you
I
can.
had.
That's
I don't have
crazy.
one.
That's
Um.
dope.
And anyway, that was just like I think that really shaped who I became. Like
Mm,
how I don't know. Like I just never had a normal path, and like that's like my joke is it's just like like I'm just a punk ass. Like I don't want to do take the traditional path. Like I want to go my own way.
right.
And I think a lot of that came from that experience of like being around a lot of people who did that young and it worked, like
Mm,
seeing that there's like a lot of non-traditional ways to like create in the world, I think inspired me to do that, to like to do shit like that.
right.
Yeah.
I think that that goes to show how like you mentioned this earlier of like not really speaking to authority. Like, can you think of other times where you kind of like stood back to authority?
Stood back?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Like stood up to authority, I guess, or
Oh,
like
yeah, yeah. That's an interesting question. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't like say necessarily say like define it as like authority, but like the status quo or like the sort of traditional path. I
right,
mean,
right.
like um I feel like leaving Google was like a
Mm,
big that was hard, like because they pay you so well, and once you're like vested, they just like dangle this cash carrot in front of you like every few months. And that felt very like I don't know, it felt like everyone's like, this is crazy that you would leave, So
mm,
that felt something where I was like, okay, I'm not doing this. Like, I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna go my own way. Um, Also, too, I think design is often the practice of like asking why. Like when someone says this is how you do it, you're like, well, why? Well, is there some other way that we can do it? So I think that's like another. Just doing client work. Sometimes like clients will conflate like describing the problem with prescribing the solution. And so you have to be like, hold up, like, let's take a step back. Like, just because you have an idea of how to solve this doesn't mean that that's how to solve it. So it's like, I don't know, this is all kind of dancing around, like, standing up to authority. Like, I don't know. I'd have to think more. There's not, I mean, when I worked for Shepherd, like, I got arrested numerous times for putting posters up, like, all over major cities around the US. So that's like a very direct, like, example. But I don't know. As I got older, I feel like I kind of chilled out a little bit and
mm,
started doing that in less explicit ways and more like implicit ways. So for me, like, you know, building tools that allow people to create and deploy smart contracts, that are legitimate, you know, legitimate parallels, legitimate alternatives to existing ways of working and organizing, like that feels like kind of a radical act to me, you know?
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. I think leaving Google is like a huge one. I feel like being the status quo and just kind of moving away from that would be it like would be huge. Chat's kind of asking like, do you think that DAO like a DAO is a business model? Like, how would you? I know you said that you hate the word DAO, so I guess like, what would be the best way you would try to define this kind of category?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that like we're working on something right now and we're going to announce it in January, but it generates returns. So it does not pass the Howey test. It's a fucking security. We're okay with that. We're doing all the regulatory legwork that we need to comply with the law and not get sued or thrown in jail. But I mean, you're going to put money in and you're going to get money out. And like, that's a business. And so I think that again, like, we're using a smart contract to do that, and that contract will allow anyone to join. There'll be a limit on who can join. It'll be comprised of individuals. Does that make it a DAO? Like, or a protocol, you know?
Mm,
The DAO or protocol, well, maybe you ask the question, like, you'd have to say, well, is there governance? Maybe there is, but maybe there isn't. Maybe it's
mm,
governance minimized. Like Vitalik has this whole thing about that. That's brilliant, which is like, and if you think about like living in society, it's like you don't really want to be like governed by an organization that requires your constant attention. The idea would be to like, is that it's solved, and preferably solved at the contract level, so that you're
mm.
not having to constantly, work on things to sort of like reorganize your structure. Um, is
For
that a DAO or not? I mean, I don't know. This is where it gets weird. What I will say is that communities of people can come together, pool capital, deploy that capital, and then generate returns. I definitely
mm.
think that's possible. Like we're going to launch something that does exactly that in January.
So for one, can you explain what the Howey test is for those who don't know? And then two, like, can you give any alpha on that? Like, what does that look like? And if it is a group of people and there's no centralized authority per the Howey test, like, can't it technically pass it?
So as I understand the Howey test, it's like, you know, do people invest with the expectation of return?
Right.
That's one of the bullet points. And if the answer is yes, then there's a good chance it's a security. Um, and you know, I feel like sort of we're in the like Netflix sending you a DVD in the mail phase of crypto. Like the founders of Netflix knew long ago that in the future all content would just stream over the internet. Like they knew
Hmm.
that like way early on. But the technology was not there. The pipes weren't there. Like the core infrastructure just wasn't there yet. And so they're like, okay, well, what is the like iterative step that we can take to get there? And they're like, fuck it, we'll just put DVDs in an envelope and then ship them to you. And
Hmm.
eventually, we'll just stream that shit over the internet. Another good example would be like Amazon, where they're like, Bezos is like, okay, in the future, you're gonna just buy everything online, but we're not there yet. And so, what makes it really easy? Like, I'll put a rectangle with a barcode in a box. That's like the easiest first step towards this idea. And I feel like with DAOs, with smart contract mediated communities, with protocols that produce returns and distribute those returns via a token, question is like, how compliant do you need to be, right? Like there's a lot of teams that are just like fucking, they're gonna just YOLO it, they're just like fuck it. And the SEC is taking legal action,
Yeah.
like it's like, so the question though is like, how much longer can that go on for? Like what
Hmm.
happens if the tools just explode? I mean, the organization is not set up and arguably could never be set up to enforce such a thing. An example that I look at is like Uber. Like Uber and Airbnb, like both got bigger than any regulator wanted them to, but it just
Right.
happened so fast. It was like this explosion that you couldn't shut down. And I think that that moment will come in crypto. And when it does, we'll be ready. Like we'll have the tools. But until then, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe it never comes. But until then, like we need to follow the law. I don't want a target on our back, so we
Mm,
need to like do what we can to comply, and we are. And but we're like, it's expensive. Like
yeah,
I check the money that we spend every month, and it's like by far we spend more money on lawyers than on anything else.
that's
Like
crazy.
it's really hard to follow the law. It's expensive.
Mm,
So yeah, and I'm sorry, I cannot say anything about what we're doing.
that's
I
fine.
I can't speak to it right now.
What do you think is like the most bullish kind of like opinion or thought you have on DAOs in the future? Like what
Foolish?
is bullish?
Oh, bullish. Yeah. Oh, I mean, I think DAOs are going to just reorganize society, like top to bottom.
Mm,
Like, I think that if you look at an LLC or a C corp or an S corp or a 501(c)(3) or any kind of like corporate entity, like what's actually happening there? Like, what is really going on for real?
right,
It's the convergence of three things: people, money, and ideas.
right.
That's what a common enterprise is. And the next step that happens is to express the rules, of engagement, to express the relationship between participants in a legal contract,
Hmm.
right? And then to sign is that you execute that contract in a geographic region that is then subject to the laws of that region. So the way that I think about this is that that legal contract is like a really old programming language that fucking sucks.
Right.
And the geographic region is like a computing environment in which that program, which is the operating agreement, runs. That's insane, right? if you
Mm,
have if you have some conflict, if there's like some bug that you've identified, you have to like go to court, like, and sit in front of a judge whose judgment is going to be like highly biased and will change depending on what time of day it is. There's like evidence that demonstrates this. Like, that's insane. And so
right.
when you think about expressing those same relationships between participants and creating those same incentives, but doing so in code and running in the EVM, like running in a computing environment that's a blockchain, you're getting like orders of magnitude greater efficiencies, and you can do all sorts of like new things, novel things that you can't do otherwise. For example, when you start a company, like, it makes zero sense to like take money from someone who wants to cut you a check for like $1,000, right? If you're raising like, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or more in a round, just the overhead of like getting your lawyer and accountant
Mm,
and the cap table management, like doing all that for someone, who's just putting in a small amount of money, it's not worth it.
right.
But when
Right.
you but when you express those relationships in code, then it's just, you get the kind of like you get the like economies of scale that you get with software, which is whether it's one person or whether it's 10,000 people, it's, you know, functionally very similar, like, so to me, we're at the very beginning of this story, and it will play out over the next, I don't know, decades, but basically, like, I think once the tools get better, it's just going to be obvious. Like, why would anyone create an LLC or a C corp or an S corp or a 501(c)(3) or any of the other sort of US style corporate entities? What, you would just do it in code. You just create a smart contract.
So
Like, it's obvious.
so would you say that? a DAO can be thought of as like a digital business structure?
I think that's one. I mean, so I would just say a digital structure,
Hmm.
and it could do business,
Hmm.
but it may not be profit seeking. Like Gitcoin is a good example of that, right? There's like
I see.
there's many it could have there could be many different goals. Business could be one goal, and there could be others. And so I just think of it as like a digital structure between um, people, ideas, and capital. And then, of course, you can't forget the machines themselves that are like where this whole thing is like running.
Hmm. Um, yeah, that makes sense. I really like your explanation of like the environment of how a law currently applies. I think that's like really cool because it's in the context of kind of what's currently happening with DAOs, or at least what people are trying to like make happen, which is obviously what you're working on. Someone asked like, do you think? Let me scroll back. Like, do you really think that any DAO can be a non-profit seeking? Like, can you talk more about that? Because that's really interesting.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like public goods. I mean, Gitcoin is a good example of that. Like there's been discussion about creating a Farcaster DAO that wherein you actually I had a chat with Varun about this a while ago. I still think it's a good idea worth doing. And if anyone wants to do it, we'll help you. We'll help. I mean, we'll help with the legal and software side, obviously. But one idea was you raise a very small amount of money from like say 50 people. Like just say like 50 people each put in $1,000, and then those 50 people sort of represent the DAO. and
Right.
and then what they do is they fund um like indie developers that are building on the Farcaster protocol could
Mm,
submit a proposal and get funding from this DAO, but a small amount of funding, like $2,500 or something.
right.
And then and so you could just stop there and say that that's the whole purpose of it. And maybe you get like an NFT, that
Mm,
like shows it's like street cred. It's like you're like, look what I did. Like I helped this community of independent developers building on this protocol. And so there's like reputation value there. But you could go a step further and say that doing that grants you an option to participate in a future round of funding if that developer were to choose that path.
mm,
So say like Greg is like, okay, I'm gonna raise money for Far Drop or whatever. It's like if this existed and he got, a grant, then any investor that was like part of that DAO that, gave him that grant would have the option to invest in his seed round.
mm,
So there's value there. Like there's a lot of value there. So like is that profit seeking? Like you could argue that it is, but you could also argue that it isn't. I mean, especially if you like stop it at like, no, you don't get anything. You don't even get an option to invest. Like you just get the NFT. It's just cred, just reputation. So like that would be one example
right.
of a DAO that like isn't purely business focused.
Right. Hmm. That's interesting because then you think about like, let's say that Greg, with Far Drop and it becomes really popular, number one app on Farcaster in 10 years and 1 million people are using it. And there's
Uh-huh.
50 people that have the Genesis Far Drop NFT. Those NFTs would be worth something, right?
Right?
I mean,
Yeah,
it's value creation with the community, which is like the most interesting part, obviously.
totally. Totally.
Do you think like what do you think is the future of Fabric? What would be like the ideal kind of like North Star? We made it.
Mm. That's such a good question. I mean, I think that everyone who's building something should like answer this question. It's really,
Mm,
really important.
mm-hmm.
For us, I think it would be that there's for people who are serious about building something and who want to put in the work, they can, and they can make it real, and they can do it at scale.
Mm,
So whether that's so to me, it would be something like, I don't know, like look at something like Shopify or Squarespace or WordPress, or it's like anyone who wants to build a website today can build a website. It's trivially easy. If you're serious about it, you can do it. Um, and so that would be like anyone who's serious about pooling money and people together to execute an idea can do it. It's trivially easy. If we achieved that at scale, then I would be like, yeah, we did our job, you know?
mm,
I think another big piece for me, and not everyone agrees with me on this, but like, I just don't want to be in the business of like running a centralized platform. That's what we are today. And I think there's value there, but I also think it's very important to offer alternatives,
mm,
So we talked a little bit about like the WordPress model,
right. Right.
wherein, WordPress is this kind of interesting, there's like different sort of actors in this universe of WordPress, which is you have Automatic, which is the company that maintains the open source code base WordPress. Then you have WordPress, the open source code base. Then you have WordPress, the SaaS product, which
Mm,
essentially hosts the open source code base for a fee. And then you have this third party developer ecosystem that's building plugins that can run in either computing environment. So I like love that model, like, so if a community wants to run its own infrastructure, if that's something they care about, then I would like for them to be able to, like using Fabric. I would also like for, um, even for people who don't want to do that now, knowing that they have the option is important. It's just like, would you want to be a member of a country that didn't issue passports?
mm,
Like, no, like, you know, even if you don't plan on leaving all that often, like knowing that you can is really important. And
right.
so I think that translates to software as well.
Mm,
And so that's like another thing that, because then it can live on past the company. And I think
right.
that like I think that's important. Like
Mm,
you don't want the tools to be coupled to the company. Like those things should be separate. Like right now, if Automatic went out of business, you just snap your fingers, they disappear from the earth. All those WordPress sites still keep running WordPress, you know?
mm, mm,
And probably what would actually happen is there would be like a passionate group of independent developers that would just continue to maintain it.
right. Right.
I think that's what software wants to be.
Mm. Can you explain the WordPress model for those who don't know? Because when you explained it to me, honestly, you kind of blew my mind because it was not really something that I think about on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, just how you have like a private company that maintains an open source code base, and then the way that they monetize that work is by providing a service, uh, like essentially a hosting service, a SaaS product for that code base. And then there's like a third party. So then you have like plugins basically, which is like third party developers can then build on top of that code base and then monetize those plugins as they wish. So it's like everybody wins. Now one could say that Automatic is merely, a tens of millions or maybe even hundreds of millions of dollar business, not a multi-billion dollar business.
Mm,
And I don't know, like I think that's fine. I don't
mm,
think I think the I don't know. That's not like I made the decision a long time ago. Like money isn't. I like money. I want to make money. Don't get me wrong, but it's
right.
not the most. It's not the only thing I care about. You know what I mean? Like I think value exchange is important, but there's many other reasons why you know it like why you should do something. And so I
Mm,
think, yeah, I don't know. I go back to that model. I think about that a lot, but
yeah.
you know, it's not for everyone. It's also hard, like really hard. It's also that's why I've been so impressed with like Farcaster, because they're doing two really hard things, which is they're making a great client experience
Mm,
and they're growing that. They're onboarding a lot of people to that client regularly. And at the same time, like in parallel, they're building the protocol that client runs on. And so I think like for a lot of teams, certainly our team right now, it's like we have to choose,
Right, right. Um, yeah, I think there's a lot there. Again, that was something that kind of blew my mind. I want to take some time to read chat because I feel like people have been talking about some crazy shit on chat.
Yeah. What are these assholes saying?
Yeah, straight up.
So I feel like chat's gonna turn uh because it's my second night on Unlonely,
Yeah,
and
and then the
um
third time.
I have tomorrow, so I feel like I should just, I don't know. I feel like people are gonna be sick of me.
No, definitely not. Trust me. I did want to ask
Not
though. Hi, Johnny.
Yeah.
I did want to ask, like, if you can start a DAO yourself, anything in the world, what would that DAO be and what would it do?
Oh, it's a cool question. Let's see. Uh oh, it's so serious. That's so funny. Uh what would it do? Oh man. I have a bunch of ideas for this. So I think it would be great if there was I had this idea the other day. So I injured my knee from jujitsu. I tore my meniscus,
Okay.
and I and so I go to the orthopedist and he's like, "Yeah, you need an MRI. We don't know what the fuck is going on. If is it your meniscus, is it your MCL or whatever? We don't know." I mean, this guy, he's like the orthopedist for the Seahawks. You know what I mean? Like he's like an expert, a clinical expert. And so he writes this recommendation for the MRI, and my insurance company denied it. They're like,
Mm,
nope. And so I called the insurance company, like, hey, what's the deal? And they said, oh, well, we actually outsourced the decision to a third party called EviCorp. I was like, what the fuck? So I call this company like, hey, why are you denying this? And they say, well, you need to get physical therapy for 6 weeks. And I was like, they don't know what to do physical therapy on. Like, we don't know where the injury is. Like, what would we even be doing PT on?
right.
And so they said, sorry. So they rejected. It took me 3 appeals to get this fucking MRI. Well, I
Sheesh.
finally got the MRI. We could confirm the meniscus is torn, and so I have to monitor it and then maybe get surgery. But I was thinking, you know what the fucked up thing too is? They approved me for pain medication. They're like,
Mm,
you could get pain meds, but you can't get your MRI. I was like,
interesting.
you evil motherfuckers. So
Facts.
I thought, how much is an MRI machine? How much does it possibly cost?
Mm,
How much you got to pay the person to operate it? Like, how much does that cost? So I was just thinking, if you had enough people put enough money in a contract, and that contract could then pay out an operator and pay out the payments on the MRI machine, you could have an MRI DAO, and you just
mm,
pay a small amount of money, and it would function like insurance. There's a great episode of the Econ Talk where there's a for-profit hospital where the guy talks about how he just basically charges a fair wage for doing certain operations, and he has like I don't know 10 or 12 different operations.
right.
Like, so you can imagine like Dow health insurance or something like basically right now. So every doctor, every patient, everyone bitches about how fucked up healthcare is, and they're all right. It is fucked up. But the
Right.
question is, the hard part is how do you fix it? And it's just like you remove the fucking middlemen. You know what I mean?
Mm,
And so I think that like smart contracts could, if you had people who were domain experts in the space who knew what smart contracts were and how to use them, I imagine like I don't know, a health insurance DAO. Like my little idea was just the MRI DAO. If I could just snap my fingers, that's what I would have made. That's
mm.
like,
That's dope.
um, I think a DAO is like that operates a country, like a physical region, would be interesting. That's why I pay so much close attention to City DAO. I think it's a really
Mm,
cool experiment. Like, and we already have versions of this. I mean, that's what covenants are. That's what do they do in like a condo associate, like a homeowners associate, HOAs.
right, right.
Oh,
RIP.
our hanging up gonna end in 10 minutes.
It's all good. HOAs. Right.
So like it's not that it's like not what it's not that what I'm saying right now is uh I mean there's precedent for these things, you know?
Right.
It's just introducing the efficiencies of the smart contract that I think is what the next, number of years will be. That's what we'll be focused on doing.
So I want to dive into that because you said this earlier and it kind of hit me, which is we want to remove the middleman in healthcare specifically. Like let's just like stick to that example. Like removing the middleman to you is creating smart contracts that do what that middleman does and therefore is more efficient, cheaper, etc. Like you want to create that
Sure.
process for quite literally anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly like one instance of like removing a middleman. I mean, one could argue you're just replacing them. That's often
Mm,
what's happening, right? But like, what would you rather do? Would you rather pay gas fees, you know, to like execute, function calls in the contract, or would you rather pay like, some corporation? Like, I'd rather pay the middleman of miners, of the chain, the network itself,
mm,
uh, and then whatever sort of like thin web client you use to build and deploy the tool. So, yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of, and not even just like middlemen, just middle industries that exist
mm.
that could just be completely like wiped out. But again, like we're so early, like you need to build. Uh, there's like these parallels need time to
Right.
to be built up.
Is that what the plugins would be doing? Is like trying to figure out solutions to remove those middle industries?
Like plugins on Fabric.
Yes.
uh you certainly could. You could build, like, one thing that we've talked about is a like a contract builder, so like almost like a WYSIWYG editor for a smart contract. But I would imagine you'd need a lot. I don't know, I have to think about this more. Like,
Hmm.
you'd probably need something more than just a plugin, though. I don't know. Maybe you wouldn't. That could work. I don't know. I'd have to explore that more, I think.
Because what how
Yeah.
I think about it is like Chainlink, creates these things that you can pull data from, and which there because if you have that real world data, you can implement it into a smart contract, and if you can have a smart contract that automates these things, and you can create some sort of like business around it. It kind of
Hmm.
works with the insurance example. The example I learned from was like a farmer, an ag farmer loses his crops when temperature hits 100 degrees, and if it ever hits 100 degrees, a smart contract would say like this farmer automatically gets
Right.
$100. So the
Right.
DAO would
Right.
be like a farm ag insurance DAO.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go.
There we go. We fucking solved it.
We solved it. Okay. So I can't believe it's already been like almost 50 minutes, but this is
Yeah.
supposed to be a conversation, and all it's just been you asking me questions and me blabbing on and on. When can I ask you questions?
Anytime. All
Okay,
day.
all right. Okay, okay. You mentioned growing up in a low income family. Where did you grow up?
Grew up in Salinas, California, also known as the salad bowl of the world. And when I was in high school, we were known as the number one youth homicide murder capital of California. Yup.
Whoa.
Yeah. I had
Wait, what? Why was it called the salad bowl if that was the case?
So that was just like separate, but we're huge in ag economy. So a lot of
Okay.
immigrant families move there to work in like in the agriculture kind of
Did,
community.
did you grow up? I mean, did you have like exposure to that? Like that crime? Like, did you?
Yeah, definitely. So for one, my family moved to Salinas because of the work there in the fields. And then when I was in high school, every single year I was in high school, someone from my school district would like die of gun violence. And
Fuck.
and in my junior year, there was someone that I used to sit next to like in health class. His name was also Juan Perez. He was shot and killed like like one day, and people were fucking calling me saying like, "Yo, like, are you okay? This
Oh
and
my
that," and
God.
that was pretty like traumatizing to be honest.
Oh, I can imagine. I can't imagine like what your friends and like family thought. That's
Yeah,
insane.
exactly. My mom
So,
called me that day. She was like, "Bro," obviously she was more worried, but
how long how long did you live in Salinas for? Like when did you leave?
so I moved out of my house when I was 18, like pretty much the day of I was 18, and then I lived at another family's house. They took me in, which was pretty nice. Not for like bad reasons, but just because I didn't want to live at home anymore. We had like we have like a big family with not a lot of room, so I wanted like a more of like a of my own place.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that place with my friend who lived like 30 minutes away. So I moved there before I got into college, and then I ultimately moved to college, which was in San Luis Obispo. Um, yeah.
Okay. That's not that far away, right?
No, it was like it's San Luis Obispo is like 2 hours from Salinas.
Okay. And so then and so walk me through. Walk me through. So you're in SLO, you're going to college. What did you get your degree in? And then what happened after?
So, well, to start before that, like I was really into this idea of starting companies for social good. Like in Salinas, I felt like the people I learned from the most and the organizations that gave back to me the most were in forms of scholarships. But the only reason that they were able to give me these scholarships is because of these like ag companies that would sponsor these scholarships. So for me, I always thought like if I can be a person that can sponsor something, sponsor people like myself and people kind of like that want to empower more people and or build shit, like that's my ultimate goal, which kind of refers back to why I want to do VC now because that's like ultimately what you're doing. But when I was 17, I went to an ag tech startup career fair and I went to every booth and I was just like, "Yo, do you have a job? Yo, do you have a job? Yo, do you have a job?" I found a job. I learned. I got into there like the ag tech startup scene there. I was like, okay, cool. I now know that I for sure want to do business. So then I applied with to get into a business degree, and then automatically, like first day, I went to the Center of Entrepreneurship at Cal Poly, and I was just like, yo, I want to start a company. Like, how do I do it? And they were like, well, you need an idea, and we'll like kind of foster the idea with you. And every single like year of my college career, I started a different company. And like I focused on that shit like the entire year. Nothing really came from it, but like I was able to get a lot of skills from that.
Wow, I can see it's funny like hearing you talk about like sponsoring people because you're you said what I was thinking where you're like, yeah, that's pretty much what VC is. It's like someone comes, they tell you their story, like that story like fits with the way the world you think the world is going or it doesn't.
Right.
And when it does, you're like, okay, I'm gonna basically sponsor you. You know, I'm gonna get some upside as a result, but that's functionally what's happening.
Yep. And
Um,
like I wouldn't be where I am today without the help of like scholarships. Like
mhm,
when I got into college, I got like $20,000 in scholarships, which allowed me to go to college. Because if it wasn't for that, I would just go to community college. And
mhm.
then when I when I got as a freshman, I got a full ride to go to Cal Poly, which was like dope as fuck. Because I was able to focus on shit instead of like having to grind, do work, just do like a
Hmm.
variety of different things. Which again, I want to be able to provide that to other people.
Yeah. So, okay, but like being a deployer of capital in as you know in the form of like a venture capital investor and then being a consumer of capital as an entrepreneur, those are like really different things. Like
Right.
where do you see yourself on that sort of spectrum?
So currently, like I'm obviously in like the operator role.
Hmm.
I like being in this role because you get your hands dirty, but I
Hmm.
don't think it's where you make the most amount of impact, which is why I want to move to VC. Like I want to be able to provide capital to people working on really great ideas because I personally don't think that I'm the call's about to end, but
Well,
I'll send you a link.
okay,
I'll
send me
send...
another one. These timers are hilarious. It's like a bomb is about to go off.
Sheesh. Wait, let me just start it right now, actually.
Uh-oh. Nope. Bomb's gonna go off, dude.
Damn. Fuck. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna start a new meeting. This fucking sucks. I use Brave just because I was trying to be more like Web3 native, to be honest. It kind of sucks low key because I have to like move everything, but it's whatever. So far, I'm gonna get 0.75 bat.
Sweet. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. Okay, so do you think, like, tell me more about why you think you can't make impact as an operator?
Hmm. I think that I'm not as I don't think that I think there's people smarter than me, and I think that my biggest skill set is networking, relationship building, and providing like useful feedback to overcome obstacles within a company. And I see that time and time again when I interact with people where I'm working today, why I'm getting like why I got hired and why I'm possibly going to get hired for another like role is because of that reason of strategically being able to think about what needs to get done to move forward from this obstacle. And I think that I can do that on a bigger scale in VC. Ultimately, if I can get into VC, I would be able to like learn more about the market and ultimately join a company that's like up and coming and help them out like internally, and then maybe like be smart enough to start my own company. But I just like don't think that I'm there yet. But I do think
Hmm,
that I can provide value today in that sense.
I see. I think, once there's this like, do you follow the Knowledge Project,
I
the Shane
don't.
Parrish blog for the Farm Street blog? There's this thing that he says, which I fucking love, which he says the difference between amateurs and professionals is that amateurs will identify their strengths and weaknesses and then focus on improving their weaknesses,
Mm,
whereas professionals will just accept the areas in which they're weak and then double down on their strengths.
right.
And I think that's like a really important like I know what you mean, where you're like, okay, look, I've worked in these different roles and I kind of have a sense for like where I'm strong and where I'm like not as strong. And so rather than just like spending all this time trying to, improve these areas that I'm not as strong, just fucking do the thing that you're already really good at doing.
Exactly.
It makes sense.
And then, I mean, to add on to that, like, I don't really have like, my family has never worked in corporate America. Like, my family has no connections to, like, really anything. What my family knows is just, like, how to be humble and how to help people back. Like, how to help people and how to just kind of, like, live a simple life. And I think that that is tough in terms of like being able to build a network to be able to build a company. I don't think that it's like an obstacle, but getting to that point to be able to build a company again, like I think the best path for me is to like harness, like you said, like my strengths
Mhm.
and be able to do what I know I can do the best right now.
So if you asked me this question, I'm going to ask it to you, which is, if you could snap your fingers, you can have any venture capital firm, like you're the GP, it's your firm. What do you invest in? Who do you invest in? Like, what's the whole thesis for the firm?
It's a great question. I would love to say that it would be like a Web3 native firm, but I don't think that it would be. Honestly, like what I think it would be is it would be like a impact an a firm investing in impact technology that is going to help developing countries, specifically in Latin America, because I think that that's where I get the most passion from, the most motivation from, and where I can relate to my story the most there, and to be able to invest into technology in like a general kind of like way, Web3 and or not, to be able to empower people from those nations or like these areas to like be better is kind of like what I want my thesis to be, like my story to be. And
What does that mean to be better?
I think it just means to like to progress, like to be able to create the infrastructure needed to compete. Like there is not that in Latin America. Like I think this also comes like as someone said like Juan for office. Like I would also love to run for office in the future. Like I want
Dude,
to
I
be
would totally vote for you. I would totally vote for you. You have
like
my vote.
thank you. I just simply want to like empower people who are building solutions for problems that exist. And I want to empower those people who are building solutions for problems that exist, specifically in Latin America.
I
And
got
but in terms of like running for office, I would want to do that like in America because I think that if America can be this like nation that people look up to, that helps inspire and creates hope in other nations to also follow in that footsteps that I don't necessarily think like both America and other nations like are really great at.
So, okay, that all that makes sense. So what would there be a specific sector that you would focus on? Like, I don't know, like you mentioned agriculture,
Right.
like, but maybe infrastructure, energy, technology. Like what crypto is obviously a sector. Like what like where would you want to focus on first?
I think that it would be Web3 just because that's where my expertise is in, at least my experience at least. Um, but I would actually just like have it be like a story focused fun instead of like a product focused fun. Like
Huh.
I want the person who's pitching or starting this company to have a story that it's like a true story, like that I can feel passion from, that I can connect to, that speaks volumes. That doesn't always necessarily relate or like kind of like relates back to having a great product, but what it does relate to is having a really great founder. And as we all know, it's always better to invest into a good founder than like, or not always, but like than just to invest in the product itself or the market. And that's something that I think I hold a very large thesis in is in if I can invest in stories the fund would do like great. And obviously then you want to be able to help the founder kind of like get, what is needed, the resources needed to like make a successful company, a successful product. But I think that's easy. I think what's hard is finding good founders.
Yeah, wow, that's a like I hadn't ever well, it's interesting like a story. Can you say that again? A story focused fund?
A story focused fund.
Interesting. It's funny because one of the things that I feel like I learned when I was pitching and raised
Mm,
money for the Fabric round, I had never raised capital before. And one observation I had, I was like, oh, it's all just charismatic storytelling for a seed
mm,
round.
right.
I think in later rounds, it's like, no, no,
Yeah.
you need to demonstrate performance. Like no amount of your bullshit storytelling is gonna like, get you past seed. But still, though, I mean, that's kind of a big deal. Like to go from that all important moment of like 0 to 1 where you're
Right.
like, okay, there's no company and like now there's a company. It's like all charismatic storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
That's like all it is. But I had not considered flipping that.
Mm,
It's like charismatic storytelling from the founder to the firm. But like what you're talking about is like sort of story focused firm where it's like the firm is sort of telling the story. Although I guess firms raise capital themselves, right? Like they raise
right.
from fees, so there's certainly some storytelling they have to do. But
Definitely.
yeah, that's a really fascinating concept.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like curious to hear. I if you have you written about this?
No, I definitely haven't.
If you wrote like a blog post or something, I would like totally want to read about this. I
All
think
right.
that's a really interesting idea.
I'm gonna write that down.
Um, okay, so there's another thing I wanted to ask you, which is how do you go from okay, you're in Salinas, you then get into Cal Poly, your family is working in the fields, you have this, there's these sort of scholarships that are sponsored by big ag, so very agricultural kind of or like focus. How do you fucking get into crypto, dude? Like, where?
Mm.
How did that happen?
That's a great question. Well, for one, I love basketball. So like I got into NBA Top Shot kind of like in January or
Okay.
February. And like I was just like, "Oh, if I can get a this NFT thing of Steph Curry, like that's pretty cool. Like I want this video of Stephen Curry and there's only going to be like 100 of them. Like, oh, cool. Like I'll buy it." So
Okay.
my account's actually like 0.3%, top 0.3% in the ecosystem in NBA Top Shot.
Oh my
Yeah.
Oh, that's wow. Okay. So you got really into it then, clearly.
Right, yeah. But that's not why I stayed in crypto. Like I ultimately stayed because of what I saw what was happening with people providing jobs with people from developing countries, specifically in a guild scholar model. And I saw this was like kind of going on with Axie Infinity and I didn't really know like what to make of it, but I decided like if I can spend my money on one thing, it would be to do business that empowers others to like just get money to do what they want. And I started my guild. It was Origen Infinity, and at the added speak, I had 30 people, and I started off with one person, and she DM'd me on Facebook. She's like, "Hey, I'm looking for a scholarship. I'm willing to work, with you." And we started this like guild together, and like they were playing games to fund their schooling, to fund their rent, to fund a whole bunch of different things, and it was really amazing to be a part of where I was able to provide that like for them. Obviously, I was also getting something in return kind of for like the risk that I was taking, and ultimately I lost a lot of money from that. But like if I can do it again, I would do it again 110% because
Oh,
I learned so much and I was able to help people. And ultimately, like that's what intrigued me the most about Web3 was I can help anyone in the world as long as I have like a connection to them.
yeah.
And it goes back to like DAOs. Like you can do this with anybody in the world as long as like you can communicate with them. And then also it was like a chance for me to speak Spanish a little bit more because I was just like trying to, you know, just speak more.
Yeah. Wow. So what happened with that?
Well, Axie Infinity was just built off of like super sketchy tokenomics because so the SLP price was based off of how many players were in the ecosystem, and how many players were in the ecosystem were based off of how many NFTs were created in the ecosystem. As more players entered the ecosystem, more NFTs were created, therefore more inflation on their SLP token, their currency token. So as like you needed to have an increase of users to have an increased amount of price correlation for the SLP. And once there was a decrease, the amount of NFTs still stayed constant, which means that the inflation was still
I
increasing
see.
with
I see.
when people were still like pulling out more money than there was, which ultimately crashed the token. And now you can like earn like maybe like 20 cents a day, but like that's nothing.
I see. I
Yeah.
see. Well, so that's like a horrible outcome, but yet it's sort of amazing that that didn't completely sour you on like the whole industry, but that you stayed connected.
Right. Right. Yeah, I definitely had like my worries, right? But like every single day was like this is a like my whole story has been this is a long-term play. Like I'm not
Yeah.
gonna like do this for one day and then quit. It's gonna be if I have conviction in this, I'm gonna continue to do it because that's how I've been able to get to this place. Is I have there I said this one day and I kind of stunned myself. It was like the reason why I've been able to get to this place is because I'm empathetic and I don't give up. If you can have
Yeah.
those two things,
Powerful.
then that's all you really need because then
Yeah.
you're good.
Yeah. That's right. Empathetic and don't give up. I mean, you kind of have to work your ass off too, right?
Right. Yeah.
uh,
Which is like don't not giving up, right? Like if you fuck up, then
yeah.
you're just gonna keep on going.
Yeah. I think that's right. Where are you based now? Are you in California still?
No, I'm in New York. I moved with my girlfriend. I love her so much, honestly. Shout out to Lily. She's probably never gonna watch this, but like huge shout out to her. And so she works at an airline company, and she works
Cool.
in like data analytics in corporate.
Are you in New York City?
in Long Island City, so just outside.
Long Island City in Queens?
Yeah, yeah.
Nice. Are you a Mets fan?
No, I don't watch baseball, but if I were to be a fan of something, it would be San Francisco. Like, come on, because I was
Oh,
like
yeah,
in that
of course.
area.
Right,
Yeah.
right, right. So I this year I've always hated baseball. I thought it was like the biggest bullshit sport ever. And but I realized like I needed something in my life to just like chill me the fuck out.
Mm,
And so I just decided to get into the Mets. I was like, I'm gonna start paying attention to baseball, and the Mets are gonna be my team. And so I started just like forcing myself to like watch Mets games.
all right,
And so when you mentioned Long Island City, Queens, I'm like, well, the Mets play in Queens, so
right.
maybe you're a fan. Anyway.
Yes, yes, bro. I mean, I've been to what's the other one? The Yankees? I've been to the
Yeah.
Yankee Stadium. I haven't been to Mets Stadium. I'm down to
Okay.
go.
The Yankee Stadium's in the Bronx.
Right. Yeah, yeah. It was like a subway ride. Pretty. So you're also in New York then, I'm guessing.
Uh, a what?
Are you also in New York then, I'm guessing?
No, no, I'm in Seattle.
Oh, well.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm from San Diego. I moved to the Bay Area. I moved to San Francisco to work at Google, and then I fucking hated it there.
Right.
And then I moved to Seattle because there was a team here, and I was coming up here all the time. So I was like, yeah, I'll move to Seattle. And then but now I want to move from here too. I'm like way over Seattle, so I don't know where to go. Actually, I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I want to go somewhere where there's sun, uh,
Mm.
and
Why not
isn't
San
too.
Diego?
You know what? Actually, I've been considering back to San Diego. My co-founder Dan lives there,
Okay.
and so that might make sense. But it's expensive. It's super expensive now.
Yeah, it is.
Victor saying you guys have sun in New York. I think that's only true during the brief window of fall and spring. Well, obviously summer, but summer's
Summer.
miserable in New York.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it
Yeah,
can
then
be.
Steph says, no, we don't.
Yeah, we don't have that
Yeah,
much
Steph's
sun.
right. That's right.
I've never experienced like winter with snow, so it's gonna be a very
Oh,
interesting winter for me.
oh, dude. Have you gotten all your gear yet? You need like a bunch of shit for winter, like boots.
I haven't, but I need to.
Oh man.
I'm kind of waiting for my girlfriend to get back. She went to Germany, um, to like help me with those things. Um,
Yeah. Um, all right. Well, when you raise your fund, your story focused fund, when you're the GP of the fund, I definitely want to be an LP.
that's right.
Hopefully I'll have made enough money from Fabric that I'll be able to like cut you a check for your fund.
Yes, that would be dope. Appreciate that. Gives me
Okay, what we've been going for a while. I'm happy to keep talking, but we should maybe wrap it up. But before we do, I'm curious, um, what are you most excited about right now?
hmm. In general.
You can answer it however you want.
Hmm. All right, I'm gonna ask you that same question so you can think about it as well.
Okay. I have like an obvious, like I have an easy answer to this.
Hmm. I think that I'm most excited for creating new connections, honestly, through Farcaster. I don't
Mm.
think that I've never really been early in anything like this, and I've never really been so upfront with who I am on like a social media. And I did the math today, like in the total cast is on Farcaster, I have like 1.2% of it. So, so I'm like a super huge power user, and I meet like dope people like yourself every single day, and I'm so excited to like continue that.
That's cool. That's awesome. Well, I'm with you. I share that enthusiasm for Farcaster. I feel the same way. Um, my answer, dude, it's like it's Fabric. That's the thing.
Mm,
You know what I
mm-hmm,
mean? Like
mm.
that has to be the thing. That's going to be the thing for probably like the next decade of my life, you know.
Right, right. That's
I had a
crazy to
kid.
say.
I had a kid last year. That's been great.
Congrats.
Thanks. Yeah. So that's pretty exciting.
That's
Um,
huge.
Yeah,
How
it's
has that
huge.
been? If you can like to end off the stream, how has
Okay.
that been?
The first 3 months were really, really hard, and then it got progressively easier, and now it's easy and awesome.
Mm,
That's like my short answer on now. My wife's a full-time mom,
right.
so that obviously makes it way easy for me. But yeah, it got a lot easier. But the first 3 months, really, really hard. I was actually fundraising in the first 3 months. So
Wow,
it was
dude.
really hard, really,
Yeah.
really hard. But I just felt like, fuck it, like I'm at this point in my life where I just didn't care. I was like, I don't care how hard it is. I'm just gonna fucking do it. And that's
Mm,
it. And so I'm glad I did. I knew that there would be like a hump that I got over, and I did. And so I feel like it's just going to be smooth sailing from now, even when it's really hard. It won't be that hard. I don't know. Maybe it
mm,
will.
mm. I don't think so. I think that you have the long-term mindset that you need to be successful, and I think that you have the passion and the story to be successful. So can't
Thanks, man.
can't wait to see, what happens from now. I know it's going to be a long-term game, so I'm actually going to set up the Web3 link fabric
Oh
site
yeah.
tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Make a Loom video. Like I want you to tell me all the parts that like you like, that you don't like,
Mm.
that it works, it doesn't work. Like any feedback you have for me, please give it to me so that I can make it better.
Okay. So you want me to create a video as I'm like creating the account?
If I mean, if you have Loom set up and it's easy for you, then I would appreciate it. But I don't want you to like, if it's too much of a pain in the ass, don't worry about it. But I just even just like your feedback, like just quick bullet point, like just your takeaway. I would really appreciate it.
Don't worry, I'll record. Don't worry about
Okay,
that.
dude, I have had so much fun. I had as much fun doing this as I did watching the one that you did last week.
Nice.
So I would love to do it again with you. But regardless, I'm gonna vote. I'm gonna upvote your stream. It doesn't matter who you're going against. Even if you and I go against each other on Unlonely, I'm gonna just upvote you. I
Yo,
just
don't,
want to
yeah.
watch your streams. I feel like, and now I'm gonna just start like doing Brian's job right now. But I feel like you should have, if you had a daily stream, if you did this every day, I would probably tune in every day. This is so fun. Like you should have like a podcast or something, or like and do this. I don't know. You're like really good at this.
I mean, what this is just I feel like meeting people is like how I perceive it. I would love to meet people every day on stream. I think that would be fucking dope.
Yeah. But like I
What do
know
you
what you
think?
mean. It's just meeting people, but like you're a really good listener, but
Mm.
then you also have a lot to share as well. You
Mm.
know? It's
Mm.
it's good. It's really good.
That I've also noticed that that is a strength that I have, and I learned that specifically when I moved out of my house. That's a story for another day, because it is getting
Okay,
late.
part two.
Part
Part
two.
two. I want to hear
Yep.
about it.
Let's go. All right. Well, thank you so much. Do you want to like drop anything like people can follow you?
Oh yes. Okay. With fabric.xyz, if you are part of a community or you're thinking about creating a community and you need a place to hang out that isn't the cesspool of noise and spam that is Discord, and that isn't this mess of like discourse conversations and snapshot proposals, if you want to bundle those things together into one seamless experience for yourself and your community members, let me know. We will set up a pilot for you on Fabric to test out. And if you like it, then we'll make it the real thing. So uh, that's what I would say. And follow me on Farcaster and follow Juan.
Yes, non-linear and Juan on Farcaster.
That's right.
Uh, Thank you everybody for joining. I've had a great time. Thank you again, Johnny. It's been
Yeah,
dope.
thank you.
I know that we're gonna keep on talking, so there's
I'm
no
psyched.
need for a goodbye.
Okay. Yeah.
Good night, man.
You too.
All right, y'all. Good night, everybody. Gian in the chat. It was dope. Appreciate y'all. Love y'all. Have a good one. Later.